folks. Denny here, wearing my Reasonable Faith hat. I want to talk to you about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, which is the reliability of the Gospels. Understanding how and why the Gospels are written the way they are is a real boon to you in your reading of the Gospels and your enjoyment of them as well. We tend to look at the Gospels when we read them sort of as another history book, which of course they're not. It's more of a biography. But even so, we're used to biographies and histories that are written by modern historians that are very, very dispassionate, very much detail-oriented. Everything is in a line. It's done in a method that you've come to expect. When you look at the Gospels, they don't seem to be linear as far as their chronology is concerned. Some of the stories we look at seem out of place at times. And the reason why is that the Gospels are sort of more like a biography and like an ancient biography. Now, what's the difference between a modern biography and ancient biography is modern biographies are very dispassionate. That's sort of not the opinion of the author that we're interested in. It's the facts and details. Whereas an ancient biography is about writing for a specific purpose. Okay, and that purpose is almost always a moral purpose. You can see this in all kinds of writings of the Romans and the Greeks. It's very much trying to teach you a lesson or come up with a point, right? And that's the same thing with the Gospels. What you have in John chapter 20 is a statement by John saying why he's writing this. And he says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Okay, so you can see there, this is not meant to be just, giving you some facts. It's more of to tell you a factual story with a purpose, right? Now, why do we talk about reliability? One thing that you might hear on, on TV or on the internet or wherever, in universities even, is that the Gospels are sort of badly written, full of errors. They can't be trusted. And it's very popular to say that, especially in the 21st century. A lot of the arguments, I would say the vast majority of those kind of complaints, you can dismiss them because they're not really well founded. But some of them, as we even read it ourselves, can make us scratch our heads. There's times we come across something in the Gospels and we say, it just seems very odd. Is it in fact an error? How we come up with something that is sort of saying there's actual contradictions in the scripture. So what I want to do today is talk about how the Gospels are written, why they're written, okay, and what is the purpose of some of these things that are in there that seem to us like contradictions that might in fact have be there not only on purpose, but have a very important fact to tell you. Now, the first of the episodes we want to talk about one little element at a time, sort of writing tools or elements the Gospel writers use. And the one we're going to use today is called transference, okay? Transference. So what is transference? Transference is, as it says there on the page, putting words in your mouth. Kind of that's a phrase we use. But transference is more of the idea that someone says something, but the way it's recorded somewhere is that somebody else, in fact, said it. Sort of if you told a joke, let's say, and then somebody else tells it and says they got it, they're the ones who made it up, you'd be pretty mad. If somebody made a mistake, you'd say, well, he didn't say that, the other guy said it. But now you have a case where you're going to see in the Gospels, in more than one places, this idea of transference. And we're going to say, is this an error? Is the wrong person saying something? In one Gospel, it says one person is saying it. Another Gospel, another person is saying it. What we're going to look at is see whether this is in fact an accident or an error. And I'll tell you that what we're going to try and show is that it's not only not an accident or an error, it's not an attempt to trick or cheat anybody, but it's a way to move the story along and get to the purpose of why it's being written. Okay? That's what we're after. We're going to look at an example of this right out of the scriptures, so it'd be something you can see, and it's from a familiar story. You probably do know this particular one. It's in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 to 10, and in Matthew chapter 8. It's the same story. It's the one about the centurion and the suffering servant. Like I said, you might be aware of it. It's a popular story. But we're gonna look at these two things and see what kind of differences are in them, and see if in fact the Gospels are contradictory and shambling or have problems with them, because this is an example that might be cited by people. And let's see what the text says for itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to read both these passages, and I want you to try and keep them in your head as we go through this. Okay, so I'm going to read the first one. This is from Luke. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man of authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. I tell that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Okay, so keep that version in mind. And let's look at the way Matthew looks at the same passage. Okay, you notice it's a bit shorter already. So in this one, we read, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "I shall come and heal him." Oh, sorry, shall I come and heal him? The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, for I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. I tell that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done as you believed it would." And his servant was healed that very hour. Okay, right off, I think you probably got the point right away. In Luke chapter 7, the centurion has sent people to Jesus. He doesn't even appear. He doesn't appear at all in this passage, right? He sends the elders of the Jews to him, and then later, when they're coming to his house, he sends friends to him. And yet, Matthew has a very different story as far as where the centurion is. In Matthew's story, the centurion comes to himself. So now we have a problem. Both these things can't be right. Therefore, one of them is wrong. Right? They seem to differ in this very important detail. So now, what are we going to say? Is this in fact an error, or is this an example of transference, where it seems like Matthew is putting the words that the people who had been sent by the centurion to Jesus in Luke, Matthew is saying, "Oh, it's just the centurion himself." Now, again, is there an error? Right? We're going to look at this. Now, you might say, trying to make sense out of this is a cop-out. It's trying to avoid an error, right? And the reason you'd probably say that is because we just don't talk like this now, right? We don't use this technique when we're narrating. If somebody says something, you say that person said it, right? Let's see. Okay, I took some examples here to see whether this is in fact true, that we don't use this kind of language at all now, and it's something that might be just from that time, and it might be just an error in the text. So what I did was I went on the internet and I plucked out 3 story headlines. Right? These are literally torn from the pages of, of the internet, and they're all involving Canadian politics. So the first one says, Justin Trudeau introduces bill to legalize marijuana in Canada. The second one says, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has put forward a bill to extend human rights protections. And then the last one, it's a little bit older. It says, Bill C-10 was passed in the House of Commons and received royal assent in March 2012. Okay, let's ask the question now. Which one of these things, or in fact, are any of them in error? Or are they all telling the truth? Well, let's look at this. Justin Trudeau introduces bill to legalize marijuana in Canada. Now, you wouldn't give a second thought to that, right? You'd say that, okay, I understand. And the same with the other ones. They seem quite straightforward. But there's a problem with all these things. The Prime Minister never introduces bills into the House of Commons or the Senate. That's not his job. When a bill is to be introduced, it's introduced by either a cabinet minister or a private secretary or an actual member of parliament. The Prime Minister does not introduce bills into the House or the Senate. All right, so you have in here, Justin Trudeau introduces bill to legalize marijuana in Canada. That's a problem, right? And this is from professional journalists. This is not from some weird, behind the scenes site. These are all from major newspapers. So the question is, as we look at it, what went wrong? Well, let's look at how bills are in fact introduced into Parliament and how they're voted on, right? This is a little list here. It tells you how these things go. After the bill is brought to the House or the Senate, because it can start in either one of those two houses, right? It has a first reading. And in the first reading, you literally read it out. And what the members do is they think about it, they go away, they mull it over, they do a little research. Later on, at another day, you're going to have the second reading, right? And in the second reading, the bill is again read. Now what happens is the parliamentarians now start to debate this bill. And that again, we don't know how long that's going to take, depending on how long this debate is going to last. After that's over, the bill goes to the committee stage, right? And the committee stage is that part you see on C-SPAN, which looks really boring usually. It's a bunch of guys and women talking about this bill. As often the House is empty, and there's just a few specialists there discussing it back and forth and back and forth. And they have witnesses, they have all kinds of people to talk about it. Finally, when they eventually finish this, it goes to the report stage. In the report stage, the bill is sent back to the chamber, right? That sent it. And all the parliamentarians can debate it. Finally, there's a third reading, okay? In the third reading, they read the whole bill again, and they debate it again, right? So they can change their minds and change things in it. But now is the time where they're going to vote. Once they vote, if this passes, then it's sent to the other house, right? So if the House of Commons brought this bill in, now the Senate has to go through the exact same process of first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, third reading. And if they vote on it, finally it goes to royal assent, right? So you have to have the Governor General sign it in the name of the Queen. That's a long, detailed process. But let's go back to those headlines for a second. Justin Trudeau introduces bill to legalize marijuana. Well, we know that's false, right? Because Justin Trudeau cannot introduce bills into the House or the Senate. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has put forward a bill to extend human rights protections. No, he hasn't. Right? He has not done that. And then the third one here, look at how misleading this one is. Bill C-10 was passed in the House of Commons and received royal assent in March 2012. First of all, things are not just passed in the House of Commons, right? Now, they're not even mentioning whether this was has gone to the Senate, right? And since it has a C in front of the number, Bill C-10, it means it started in the House. So if they say this is passed in the House of Commons and received royal assent, they're skipping out the whole Senate process, right? So you got yourself a problem right there. How can it be that modern journalists writing something are making so many egregious errors in these texts? But looking at it, everybody who's reading it understands exactly what's going on. No one's saying Justin Trudeau personally went and introduced the bill. They mean his administration has done this. The same thing with, putting forward a bill to extend human rights. He's not putting it to himself. It's his party and his administration is putting it together. And when they say Bill C-10 was passed in the House of Commons and received royal assent, what they mean basically was it was debated, voted on, finally received royal assent, and they moved on from there. Okay, so we see now that here's just a small example of us using this style of narration, this tool of writing, whereas we're trying to get to a point And we're not talking about the details. Now, none of these things are really in error because they are trying to reach the point of explaining how these things or what this is all about. So they're not trying to give you a detailed account of this, but all of these things are factual, right? Just as much as you can point at it and say this is an error, they are in fact quite factual, right? So now if you have our little passage in the Gospels, let's go back there and see what's going on, okay? We go over here, let's go back to Luke 10. Why would gospel writers use that particular method? I mean, why not just say, okay, this story was the centurion sent some friends to do it. Why did Matthew have to change it? Okay, now to do this, we're going to go back to the whole idea of purpose and why things are written the way they are. Let's talk about Luke. Luke is not an apostle. He's Dr. Luke, the Greek, right? His work is written not specifically to Jews, but to Gentiles. Of course, Jews read it and Gentiles read it, doesn't matter. But his emphasis is on Gentiles. And you see that in a bunch of cases throughout his text where you'll see he's explaining things from the Old Testament that a person who was Jewish would not have to have explained to them. He also mentions some things that are specifically about places that are not, like he says about a roof being dug through in another gospel, because roofs in Judea were earthen. Luke says they removed the tiles, which is sort of the Gentile buildings that are outside of the area. So he's using terms that his Gentile readers can understand. So now, what's the purpose of Luke telling the story the way he does? Well, look at what he's saying. He has this Gentile who is a centurion. What do we know about this centurion? He's a really decent guy, okay? He's such a good guy that he's actually, he's such a man of God that the Jews respect him, and he respects them also, right? To the extent that he's building a synagogue for them, and they're pleading for him earnestly, like you see in the green passage there, which does not appear in Matthew. None of that appears in Matthew. But why would Luke include it? Right? Luke is including it because he's trying to say, look at this story. You have a Gentile who is a man of God and is accepted into the kingdom, right? He's a person of authority, and yet here he is mingling with these other people from another culture, okay? And he is a man of God. So Luke is trying to give encouragement, in fact, to his Gentile readers in saying that you too are welcome in the kingdom of God like everybody else. Now, let's go over to what Matthew says. Matthew is a little different, right? He has a centurion just coming to him and saying what he says, and he's putting the words of the centurion, the words that the Jewish leaders had said into the mouth of the centurion. He's sort of shortcutting the whole story. But again, why is he doing that? Well, first of all, Matthew is written primarily to Jews, right? When you look at how much he quotes the Old Testament, it's just extensive quoting. The whole book is written from the perspective of explaining the life of Jesus to Jewish followers and people who are reading it to know more, right? So what is Matthew going to do? Look at the part that's in green here where it's different from Luke. So he says, actually just above it, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. Now, here's the killer. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, right? Why is Matthew including that part of this conversation? Well, Matthew, again, is writing to a primarily Jewish audience who might be believers and might also be people looking in from the outside. And what is he trying to say? He's trying to say, if you're a Jewish person, do not count on the fact of your Judaism. That's why he brings up Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were near and dear to the heart of every Jewish person. He's saying, look, that's not what counts, right? What counts is faith in Christ. And for an example, here's a Gentile, right? Who is being, Jesus says about him, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. So this is in a way a warning that Matthew is giving, right? That Luke is not interested in. He's saying, Matthew is saying here, if you're a Jewish person, do not just say, well, I have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. because those people point to Christ. And that is the way to salvation. So you can see here in these two passages, they're both very short. They both have specific purposes to tell the story of Christ to specific audiences so they can understand it, right? Now, how different, in fact, are these stories? They're not very different at all. If you look at the part in blue in Matthew and in Luke, they're almost identical, right? It's, I don't deserve to come into your house. I say this and I say that, and these guys do it. It's almost word for word, right? Jesus's reaction is the same in both, right? I tell you, I have not found such great faith in Israel. These stories are so close together and so almost exactly the same that to say that, well, Denny, this really is an error, these guys just didn't know what they're talking about, seems extremely unlikely. Since they got the rest of the story so closely the same, you can see that this is a fact that they are going at it from a different perspective, right? So why I wanted to bring this to you, it's an example, as I said, of how understanding how the Gospels are written, why they're written the way they are, is very important, and why, in fact, they are reliable. So if you have any questions or comments about this, give me a shout. You can go to Reasonable Faith Montreal, the chapter. We're on Facebook. We have a website. Or you can email me privately or call me anytime you want to talk about these things. And maybe in the near future, we'll do an episode 2. All right? So have a great day. Thank you very much. And thanks for listening.